Post-installation validation and configuration. In this nugget, we're going to look at how to verify what happened during the installation process. And we're also going to learn how to configure various hardware and system services once the system is up and running. So let's get to work. All right, well, let's start just by talking about some post-installation procedures here. One, to validate that everything in the installation went correctly, and see what software was installed, that sort of stuff. Find out where that information is kept on the system about what software was installed, if there were errors on boot time, things like that. And then we'll move on and talk about post-installation configuration. So the first thing I want to do here is just become the super user so that I can look at some of these files. And the first thing that I want to do with you is look at the install log. Okay, so this is the installation log about what software was installed on your system. It's either in the /temp directory or it's in the /root directory, the root user's home directory, and it's called install.log. Okay, so we're just going to look at this with the more command and look at a page at a time. And you can see the first part up here, it says installing 653 packages, and then it goes on to name the various packages that were installed on the system. Okay, now these packages that were installed in the system, basically you chose what to install on the system when you did the installation. Now you didn't choose, every package of the 653 packages. You said things like, okay, I want these developer tools, or I want these graphical tools, or I want these games, or I want these office tools, or whatever. And then, the system went ahead and installed all the various packages that you needed to get that stuff. Okay, so if you just go through this, page by page with the space bar, you go down line by line with the enter key, you can see, there's just tons and tons of files in here. There's files in here that, you didn't even necessarily choose. They were just a package that came with some, general set of packages, like I said, developer tools or system monitoring tools or whatever. One of these packages is Kudzu, okay, or Kudzu or something. I don't know exactly how people say that. But Kudzu is a hardware identification package. So when you go to plug in new hardware to your system, if Kudzu is running, then the next time you go to reboot, Kudzu will say, hey, there's new hardware plugged into your system. Should I try to install this? Or maybe it'll recognize that the new hardware you've installed has replaced something else, like you've plugged in a new printer and you've taken away your old printer, and it'll say, should I deinstall that old printer and then install this new printer, and so on. Okay, so it'll try to guide you through hardware identification and installation, that process. Okay, you can see the version of Kudzu here is 0.99. It's not even at version 1, but it's becoming sort of a standard, especially in Red Hat, just to make the process of adding new hardware easy. Okay, so this is something to keep track of when new versions of Kudzu come out. You might want to update that, even if you're not updating your regular operating system stuff, because this is at the stage now where it's going to turn over to a version 1 and become a lot more stable. Okay, so that's just one example of a package that's out there that you didn't specifically ask to install, but it's a helpful package, especially for post-installation hardware configuration. Okay, so that's the install log. There's really not much there. It's good to keep track of if you add new packages to your system. What I typically do is I keep a file on the system that says what new packages I've added, and I'll keep it in the same directory as this install log here, just so I can keep track of what the most current version of all the packages I have are. Then what I also do is I also have a printout of install log, and then I keep notes on the back of that printout about what packages I've installed since then, or what packages I've updated, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's install log. Now another log file that's very useful is in var log, and it's the let's look at dmessage. There's a log in there. Okay, so now there's a file in this var log directory called dmessage. And what this is it is system startup messages. So when you go to start up your system, things are sort of scrolling by on the screen kind of quickly, and there's no way, even if you took a speed reading course, there's no way that you could possibly read all of the stuff on here. And a lot of the stuff that's in here is not just, testing your reading speed skills. It's like detailed stuff, right? With hexadecimal digits telling you about what particular ports are being used, or how much memory and so on you have in your system. system, what the speed of your processor that it detected was, things like that. Okay, and so there's no way you could possibly read all this as it's scrolling up the screen. So that's why the dmessage file is here, to tell you exactly what is going on at boot time. So if there's something, some piece of hardware doesn't seem to be operating correctly, the first place to check is to go back into the dmessage file and determine if there's something at boot time that tells you why it failed. Okay, that's one thing to do. One nice thing here, let's just bring up a Mozilla web browser. If you really want to look through this dmessage command and understand exactly what's going on, one of the things I've done here is I've bookmarked an old Linux Gazette article, and this Linux Gazette article explains dmessage. Let me just get rid of this sidebar here so we can see it all. And you can see this Linux Gazette article. It's from a couple years ago. dmessage explained is the title of the article. And the abstract here is often someone will write to a Linux help list asking for help with a particular device. And the standard reply is check the output of the dmessage command. Now this leaves a lot of new users befuddled. It does, because dmessage, the file here, dmessage, has just a ton of information. It's just all piled up. There's no nice formatting or labeling of the various sections or anything like that. It's just a hodgepodge of information all piled in there. And so what they go on to do here, they show you the info page, which you can look at just on your system right in the shell there. And then what they do is they go through, and the sort of indented stuff here is the stuff that's in the dmessage file. And they just go on to explain, give some comments about what each of these lines is doing. Okay, what it represents, what it's telling you. Okay, notice they refer here to a dmessage command. Okay. And we just looked at a file dmessage. There's also a dmessage command out there. If we look at dmessage and pipe it through less, okay, that does the exact same thing as looking at a var log dmessage. Okay, there's just a command that looks at that file. It's called dmessage. Okay, so like I said, if you want to look at this and understand it in great detail, go through this old Linux Gazette article where the web address is up here, and check it out in as much detail as you want. I think if I went through this in as much detail as this web page does, I'd put you to sleep in 3 minutes. Okay, so I don't want to do that. And most of the detail in there is not necessarily important in your day-to-day operation, but when you do have to look at this and debug something and try to figure out what's going wrong, then it's nice to know what each of these things in the file is representing, and this article will tell you that. Okay, now let's look at a tool that you can use for post-installation configuration. Okay, so the reason you would use this is if there's something that you added to your system after you installed Linux, like you added new hardware, you changed out hardware, like you swapped your keyboard with a new keyboard, and now things aren't working correctly, so you have to go back and reconfigure the keyboard because it's just a different keyboard or something like that. Okay, so what you can use is this program in user bin called Setup. And this is just a text-based program, and it goes through and gives you the ability to configure the various stuff that you configured during installation time. Now, some of the things during installation time we really didn't talk about, like authentication configuration. If we go in there, it's talking about, do you want to use NIS or LDEP or Hesiod or whatever, Hesiod. These things we didn't talk about during installation time. We'll talk about what these things are later in the video series. So for now, we'll just go to cancel. But this is how you would go about and configure that stuff if you didn't do it during installation time and now you want to do it. And we'll do that later in the series when we actually talk about this authentication programs that are out there. Okay, so let's just go back to the main user bin setup window here. And one thing here is a firewall configuration. During installation, basically you had your choice of saying, do you want a high security firewall, medium security, or no firewall at all, or do you want to customize things? Again, we're going to talk about firewall security and stuff later in the video series, and we'll talk about how you would customize a firewall to do what you want. For now, I'm just going to leave it set as a high security firewall, okay, and go back. Now, things like keyboard configuration, we did talk a little bit about that. We did choose that during installation time. We did most of this stuff back in the introductory series. In this video series, we've mostly concentrated on more advanced issues, but back in the introductory series, we went through and chose the kind of keyboard that we have. If you go back and say mouse configuration, you get to pick, the kind of mouse that you have. So if you did something here like you changed out your mouse, then you could go through and pick which mouse configuration you want. Okay, let's just cancel this here and go back again. Again, network configuration, setting up your IP address, your gateway, your name server, things like that. Printer configuration, picking the type of printer and the driver that you want to use. System services, let's just pick that one and run that one. What this has to do with what services should be automatically started. We're actually going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in just a couple seconds, but for right now, just look at this list and see that it's just a whole bunch of services that are out there, and then various ones have a star in them, and they're the ones that are automatically started. We're going to look at that in more detail in just a few minutes. Okay, and then time zone configuration. That's obvious, right? What this is, it's just allowing you to pick your time zone, and here we are in America at the Vancouver West Coast time. Okay, so this tool altogether, that's all the different options that are in the UserBin setup tool, and it just allows you to go back and configure things that you could also configure at installation time, and you're configuring them now either because you didn't do it correctly then or because you added new hardware. One thing I just wanted to spend a couple minutes on here is just showing you how to configure a mouse that has a scroll wheel on it. So if you buy like a brand name mouse, if we go back to UserBin setup here for a second, you'll see under mouse configuration, there are all these different mouses. So first there's all these generic ones here, right? But as you move down, there's like the Genius mouses, the Kensington mouses, Logitech mouses, Microsoft mouses. If you've got a particular mouse of the brand name mouse, it usually configures it well. If it has a wheel or it's like a trackball or whatever it is, it does it correctly. Under the generic stuff, it doesn't always work correctly. Okay, so I've got this 3-button mouse. It's got a PS2 connection on it. Okay, but my 3-button mouse, the middle button is that scroll wheel, and the middle button works, or that scroll wheel works fine as the middle button. That's being configured correctly. What's not being configured correctly standardly when I choose the generic mouse is the scroll wheel isn't working. Okay, so I can't actually scroll up and down a web page, for instance, with the scroll wheel. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get that done. So here, I'm just going to cancel this, and what we're going to do is I'm going to quit out of our UserBin setup program, and what I'm going to do is go up to the Etsy X11 directory and then show you this file xf86config. We're going to talk more about X Windows and stuff in the next video, and the xf86 config file in particular. I just wanted to show you one little trick here for configuring a mouse with a scroll wheel. Okay, so let's look at this file, xf86config, and let's search in here for the mouse word. Okay, so we're going to search for mouse here. So you do the /mouse at the bottom here, you can see that, and then I hit enter, and it's going to bring me to somewhere in the file that has the word mouse, and this is exactly where I want to be. Okay, so when you set up to have this 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel, two things have to be present in these options here under your input device for your mouse. Okay, one of those things is this Z-axis mapping has to be set to 4, 5. Usually this is done correctly for 3-button mice. Okay, the thing that's not done correctly that also has to be done for scroll wheels is the protocol here has to be set to IMPS2. So maybe the protocol is set to PS2 or something else. If you have a scroll wheel on this mouse, you need to set this to IMPS2 so that it works correctly. Okay, so that's just a little sidebar here that I just wanted to show you. Exactly how to do this for a scroll wheel, since the mouse config utility doesn't take care of that if you buy the generic mouse. Alright, now I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about configuring a modem. Now I know a lot of people connect to the internet nowadays through a DSL line or a cable modem, but there's still a lot of people that connect through a serial modem or a USB modem using the point-to-point protocol to connect with their ISP. Okay, and I just wanted to give a little blurb about this, spend a few minutes just talking about what the tools are that are out there to do this. Okay, so one thing you can do is use this Red Hat Config network program. If you spell Red Hat correctly, it'll work just fine. So the Red Hat Config Network program, I'm going to hit Enter here, and this is going to bring up a window. I'm just going to close this back window so it's more clear. It's going to bring up a window that has to do with networking. Okay, and modem is one version of a way to connect to the network. Now I'm using my Ethernet card, and I've got DSL here. I don't even have a modem in my computer. But if I had a modem, under the Hardware tab, it usually gets detected. Okay, automatically by the program. Now, if it doesn't get detected, you can just always go over here to the Add, and then under Hardware Type, pick modem and say OK, and then it brings up the modem configuration window. You can choose which port you want it to run on, which serial port you want it to run on, what the baud rate is, and then what the flow control you want to use is. Now, flow control has to do with preventing what are called like data overruns or data overflows, like something's being sent at a slower rate than it's being produced, and then the flow control will just try to handle that so that the sending is sort of synced up. Okay, it's going to pause the operation so that the modem can kind of catch up with how fast your computer is sort of filling up a buffer to send over the modem. Okay, so you can turn on software flow control. You can also turn on hardware flow control if your modem supports that. So check in your modem manual whether it supports hardware flow control or not. Okay, so there's the modem configuration. I'm just going to cancel this since I don't actually have a modem to set up, but that's one tool that you can use to configure a modem. If you're using KDE Desktop, there is a program called KPPP. Okay, that also helps you configure a modem using the point-to-point protocol to connect to your ISP. And always remember, use the resources that are out there on the internet to help you choose a modem or determine if there's some problem with your modem that other people are having. So go to the Google Linux page, google.com Linux, and then just type in there Linux modems, and you're going to get all sorts of information. There's in the paid sections of the Google page, there are all these people trying to sell Linux modems, and then there's just lists of Linux modems and discussions and on various bulletin boards about which modems work well. One of my favorite websites, linuxquestions.org, which is a good website for answering questions about Linux. They archive a lot of the past questions, and so you'll find these archives in a nice low graphic format, so they load quickly. And here they reference a website for determining for a hardware compatibility list, and then a list of Win modems which are trying to be developed for Linux there, and they also list good modems to buy, he says. Okay, so use the resources that are out there to determine before you go ahead and buy a modem that it's compatible with Linux, and people have had success installing it and using it with Linux. Now let's talk a little bit about the services that start up automatically when your system boots, and how we can configure which services start at the various run levels of the system. So let's use one of these Red Hat tools again, Red Hat Config Services. And this is going to bring up a window that is going to allow us to configure what services start at which run levels. Okay. So here you can see it says currently running in run level 5, and we're editing run level 5. That's the list. What's showing up here right now is the list of services that will automatically start when we go into run level 5. And remember, run level 5 is kind of like the default run level for the system if you're using X Windows and everything else. Run level 3 is basically a functioning system without X Windows, and then like run level 1 is single user mode if you're doing maintenance on the system and you don't want anyone else to log in, that sort of thing. Okay, so if we want to change the services that run at a different run level, we can go up here to edit run level and change to like run level 3, and now we're editing the services that start at run level 3. Okay, so pick whatever run level you want, and then you can go in and alter the services that start up. Now, before you start messing with this and altering services that start up by default at boot time, you should know what these services do and whether they're sort of expendable or not. Okay, so let's just go through some of these. The Anacron, for instance, this is related to the cron daemon. Okay, and you can see here, remember cron from the introductory videos was like a way that we could run jobs at regular intervals, like on the 2nd of May, or on the 2nd of every month, or on every Thursday at 3 p.m., or every day at midnight, or something like that. You can run a set of services, and cron daemon does that, and the Anacron service runs cron jobs that were left out due to downtime. Okay, APMD has to do with power management. If you're using a battery, then APMD the service should start, because that has to do with monitoring battery status. But this is a service, since I'm using a desktop computer without a battery, I could uncheck that service, and then that won't start when the computer starts up. Okay. Let's see, what else here? AutoFS, that has to do with auto-mounting file systems. If you're not mounting network shares automatically, that could be unchecked. Okay, all sorts of things are in here. And again, you can just mouse over these things or highlight them to see a description of what they are. You should also investigate before you're going to just remove something from this list. Investigate to make sure that it's not an important one. Okay, GPM, for instance, adds mouse support to text-based Linux applications, okay, such as the Midnight Commander. I'm not even sure what Midnight Commander is, but it also allows mouse-based console cut-and-paste operations, and includes support for pop-up menus on the console. Okay, so this one is an example that incompatibilities with X Windows are a known issue with this service. Okay, but it does add some value to the console window. Like, you can highlight and cut and paste with your mouse. If you're only ever using X Windows, you're never using the system in a console mode, and the stuff that you do in the console mode you feel like you don't need the mouse, then you can uncheck that. But realize that you're going to get some limited operation from your mouse in the console window because of that. Okay, what else do we have up here? Let's see, we can go down a little bit. So you can see Kudzu, that's automatically started. The line printer daemon. Key table has to do with let's see, the key table has to do with the keyboard. It's essential for users with non-US keyboards. You need to have that checked if you have like a Spanish keyboard with, the ñ, like the N with the tilde over it, or the special characters that are in other languages. You're going to need key table enabled for non-US keyboards. Okay, so all I'm trying to do here, I don't want to show you every single one of these what they are, but I'm trying to get across the point that don't go in here and start randomly checking and unchecking things to see what they do, because you could end up breaking something that you need to operate your system. Then you're going to have to go back and check with it. So just make sure that if you start unchecking things in here, that you're sure that you don't need them. Look it up on the internet exactly what things do, whether there are known issues, compatibility issues with some services running and other services. Also, maybe you're asking yourself, well, why would I ever want to uncheck anything in here? Well, the fewer services you have running, the more free memory you have, the more free processor time you have, and so on. If the services aren't going to be used, then there's no reason to start them up at boot time, so it'll make your system boot up faster, and it won't consume as many resources. Okay, so there's a little tour of the system services and how you can configure them, and this, like I said, this is for starting up in the various run levels of the system. All right, well, it's time to wrap up another nugget. This was the nugget on post-installation, validation, and configuration. First, we talked about validating the installation of your system by looking at install log to see which packages were installed, and also the dmessage command so you can see the boot messages. And this isn't just for right after installation. This is really for any time that you discover some sort of error in your system and you want to see if there was any indication of that error the last time the system booted up. Then you can use the dmessage command or look at the file /var/log/dmessage to check out what happened at boot time. And then we talked about configuration. The user bin setup command gave us that menu so we could set up time zones and keyboard, our mouse, the network settings, firewall settings, things like that were all capable of being set up with user bin setup. And then we looked at Red Hat config network, Red Hat config services, and there's a whole bunch of these things that start with Red Hat config, and you can play around, type Red Hat config hyphen, and then hit tab twice, and it'll show you all the different commands that start with Red Hat config. Okay? Well, I hope you found this nugget informative, and thanks for viewing.